Good morning, everybody. I think we will begin today's session. Good evening to those of you joining us from the US, and welcome to those of you watching on YouTube. Welcome to the second workshop of a three-part series examining cooperative security solutions for North Korean denuclearization. My name is Shatabisha Shetty, or Shata Shetty. I am the Executive Director of the Asia Pacific Leadership Network and the moderator for today's session on CTR Plus and energy security in the DPRK. We are honored to host these workshops, which are sponsored by the South Korean Ministry of Unification and the MacArthur Foundation and supported by the Nuclear Threat Initiative. It is our sincere hope that these workshops will contribute to a renewed diplomatic approach to North Korea through the realization of a Cooperative Threat Reduction Plus initiative. As a reminder to those of you who are not familiar with our organization, the APLN is a network of over 100 political, military, diplomatic, and thought leaders from across the Asia Pacific who are working to address security challenges in our region with a particular focus on nuclear non-proliferation, risk reduction, and disarmament. So the aim of this project and these workshops is to assess ways in which we can adapt and tailor the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program to the specific circumstances in North Korea. The original CTR program offered financial assistance and technical expertise and helped secure and dismantle weapons of mass destruction in former Soviet states after the end of the Cold War. It was created by the late US Senator Richard Lugar and by Senator Sam Nunn, who we are delighted to have with us again today. The purpose of our project is to explore the viability of a CTR program adapted to the unique circumstances in the DPRK to facilitate engagement in critical sectors of their economy, such as space, energy, and public health, to open the door to diplomacy and to lay the groundwork for denuclearization. And with that very brief explanation, I will now like to welcome Dr. Peter Hayes to deliver his opening remarks for this session. Dr. Hayes is the Research Director of APLN and Director of the Nautilus Institute. He is also Honorary Professor at the Centre for International Security Studies in Sydney University, Australia. He works at the nexus of security, environment, and energy policy problems and is best known for innovative cooperative engagement strategies in North Korea, and he has visited North Korea a number of times. Previously, he's worked for international organizations such as the United Nations Development Programme, the Asian Development Bank, and Global Environment Facility. The APLN's CTR Plus project was actually first conceptualized by Dr. Hayes along with our Vice Chair, Professor Chung-In Moon. And with that introduction and without further ado, I will now turn to Peter.
Thank you very much, Shata, and I'd like to welcome Senator Nunn and Angela Kane especially, and also Sig Hecker, Gareth Evans, and all our other friends, especially our Korean colleagues who have worked with us for so many years on the North Korea conundrum, especially on the energy side. I'd like to first just reiterate, I think, some of the conclusions of the first session, because that really sets the scene, if you like, for thinking about CTR plus energy with North Korea on a denuclearization process for the Korean Peninsula. We know that CTR with DPRK will be different to that with the former Soviet Union and Russia. In the latter case, we didn't intend to disarm their nuclear force per se, whereas this is the goal for North Korea. In the latter case, we focused on the need to transition the nuclear weapons complex and its labor force to non-nuclear weapons work and to reduce nuclear risk for migration, materials leakage, etc. And although this issue of transitioning a fraction or all of the workforce to non-nuclear weapons or other missions is common between the two cases, the North Korean complex, as Sig pointed out, is much smaller, and the opportunities for gainful nuclear-related employment and nuclear weapons after disarmament is close to zero, and in nuclear power, low to zero. So the need to supplement CTR nuclear, narrowly considered with other strategic benefits in the DPRK, also diverges substantially from the Soviet-Russia-US case. The CTR equations differ, and energy is an integral part of that difference, and that's what this workshop tries to focus on. Now, since the North Korean nuclear threat erupted in 1992, energy assistance has always been a major North Korean demand, starting with the light water reactor in 92 to substitute for the Soviet VVER reactor contracted in 1985, but never delivered. Then the Cato LWR project, plus the energy aid from the six-party talks, HFO and other materials related to the grid, and now their quest for sanctions relief given the scarcities created by the loss of supply of refined product imports and limits on their coal exports. Slide 2. So why should we really pay attention? Well, to be honest, this is a really complicated story that I don't have time to go into depth now, and David von Hippel will do so in the next presentation. But many of you know about our in-country, in DPRK, energy technical assistance and development work involving wind power, building energy efficiency, energy planning, training, 30 years of quantitative, ground-truthed, measured tracking of North Korea's energy economy, in part for the DOE NNSA and to support US delegations at the six-party talks, energy working groups, our concerns about rapid humanitarian energy supply in a war done for DOD, and our most recent engagement in December 2019 in Mongolia with DPRK power grid experts to discuss regional grids and rehabilitation of North Korea's power grids, incorporating renewables-based and other mini grids. I think that was probably the last DPRK track 2 engagement before COVID hit. Nautilus has also, working with colleagues in the region, including those in the room, modeled national and regional energy pathways of Northeast Asian countries for 20 years, including regional integration via power grid interconnection, gas pipelines, emergency shared oil storage on a lease basis, and nuclear power deployment pathways under a range of policy drivers, including climate change, oil supply loss, and resilience to other shocks such as tsunamis, and now pandemics. From this experience, slide 3, please. From this experience, we have derived 5 fundamental principles that we think should guide how energy assistance would be delivered to the DPRK as part of a denuclearization deal that includes energy as the plus element. The first principle is that all assistance, emphasize the word all, that is provided to North Korea should be consistent with a regional strategy to create regional energy independence and should be based on fundamental principles of energy development, well-honed in international institutions, based on economic and energy efficiency and equity. In the six-party talks of 100 options that might have been put forward as consistent with these standards, North Korea might have accepted only one, those that were consistent with its own imperatives internally, seeking supply of material, technology, or refined fuel that maintained their current command and control production distribution system with wildly distorted price structures, energy sector institutional fragmentation, conservative factory management, and extraordinary
Peter, you've become muted.
Imagine that, the magic no hands mute. Where did I cut out, Steve?
About 30 seconds ago.
So I'll begin just about 30 seconds earlier. Some of these traditional command and control approaches have been subverted bottom up due to the emergence of vibrant, informal supply markets and use of border prices in the pre-COVID era. Extreme scarcity support forced many DPRK consumers, domestic, commercial, and industrial, to get their own energy. And many chose privately rational choices, such as small and medium-sized generators, photovoltaics, and wind turbines. And we estimate that this was over a gigawatt, or perhaps 1/3 now of their peak supply capacity. It was a massive shift. But the societal cost was high, as the unit costs of these choices are already very high, perhaps as high as $5 to $7 per kilowatt hour electric in some cases, reflecting the very high opportunity cost of the unreliability or near total collapse of the grid run by the centralized power utility in most of North Korea. This system is unsustainable, and reconstructing the existing centralized power, coal and oil and biofuels systems would be enormously expensive. We estimate that it would cost roughly $4 billion a year for 10 years just to fix the power grid, leaving aside the generator side. And given that the industrial geography itself will shift in an economic recovery in North Korea, this would probably be the wrong grid in the wrong place at the wrong time anyway. So we recommend that while we listen carefully to North Korean demands for energy assistance and respond to what they want, we also need to insist that we jointly adhere to international development assistance standards without exception, and prioritize those projects that include the DPRK in regional energy interdependence, and refuse to bargain what we're willing to pay for as an energy bribe for North Korean denuclearization as the price to be paid, no matter how absurd the demand. Now, let me, in the next slide, conclude by asserting 4 other overarching principles for CTR plus energy for North Korea. The second principle is access and transparency. No project should be allowed to proceed without standard access from international projects to sites and transparency of information to international standards for development assistance projects. Conversely, no access and information should be demanded by outsiders that is not necessary for the implementation of the project. Information is really the only asset the North Koreans have at this point, other than nuclear weapons and their conventional military. If both sides observe this principle, we have found it possible to obtain the necessary site access and information to implement projects to international standards. And obviously, these standards have to be discussed and agreed to in advance, in depth, with reference to a documented objective benchmark practice. And that might begin with a standard sector review conducted by the World Bank, UNDP, or ADB. There are many entry points for this process that can be identified. The important thing is to get it underway. And we know in some respects more about North Korea's energy economy than its own authorities, and it's entirely possible to specify a set of realistic options for the North Koreans to respond to in a realistic manner. The other principles, we should have a single point of funding and contact, and I won't spend much time on this except to say that North Korea is excellent at dividing and ruling donors on the ground who are typically not in touch with each other outside, and we need a single funding and implementation agency. Could be through UNDP, or it could be a new energy consortia, which David will talk about. The fourth principle is that the priority should be on energy services for humanitarian need. Typically, North Korea steers these projects to serve elite needs, transfers high tech that can be reverse engineered, and serves centralized utility imperatives. The priority should be on humanitarian need, especially large end users such as hospitals, and on employment creating standalone enterprises such as hotels, factories that tend to be small, fast, and incremental, much more suited to the denuclearization step-by-step dynamic, bottom-up, and consistent with mini grid or microgrid rehab of their power grid. Finally, the fifth principle is we need to reserve a placeholder potential role for nuclear fuel cycle services and or a small nuclear power reactor, but insist on strict application of economic criteria to such otherwise political or prestige choices and impose stringent liability considerations. And it's likely that only South Korea could finance and cover the sovereign risk associated with what I call a reunification reactor sited in North Korea. If these 5 principles are adhered to, then there is a high probability that the CTR plus energy element with North Korea would succeed, subject, of course, to the difficult proviso, the demanding proviso, that the other necessary conditions for a successful denuclearization process are extant, such things as the peace regime, denuclearization itself, lifting of sanctions, etc. I'll stop there, Shada. I'm sorry I went over time.
No, thank you, Peter. And before we move on to our main presenter, I just wanted to highlight to everyone joining the webinar that interpretation is available. You may select either English or Korean from the Zoom option at the bottom of your screen, either the button named interpretation, or it could be under more. And with that, we'll now move straight on to our presentation for this session, where Dr. David von Hippel will be presenting on linking CTR to energy sustainability and prosperity in the DPRK. Dr. von Hippel is a senior associate at the Nautilus Institute, where his work centers around energy and environmental issues in Asia, particularly Northeast Asia. He's done extensive analysis of the patterns of fuels use in the DPRK, as well as prospects for energy efficiency and energy sector redevelopment in the country. In addition to his work with Nautilus, he works and has worked for a number of private and public agencies, including the World Bank, the United Nations, and TELUS Institute, on a wide range of topics surrounding energy and the environment. And with that, I'll hand over to David.
Okay, thank you, Shada. And I'll share my screen here. Is that working? Yes. Is that okay? Is that working?
Yep, that's working.
Okay. Okay. So following up on Peter's presentation of
I'm sorry, David. I apologize, but your slides are showing halfway. If you could stop the screen share and start over again, we might see the whole thing.
Okay. Is that working?
Just a moment. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. So following up on Peter's presentation, what I'd like to do is give you an outline of our vision of a third-party CTR plus DPRK energy sector engagement and assistance project. Third party meaning that it's not it will be sanctioned by governments, but not presented by the governments. That is, it's composed of a number of parties from different countries and different types of organizations, such that it can be offered to the DPRK in a very rapid manner and in a very agile manner, which the governments may or may not be able to do in the short term. The idea is to be responsive to the DPRK when the DPRK says yes to negotiations, to have something immediately available or very shortly available. Then I'll talk about the DPRK as a participant in regional infrastructure, energy infrastructure, as Peter mentioned, and about identifying and matching DPRK needs with some of the consortium assistance criteria. Follow up with a short list of possible consortium priority projects and some conclusions. So I'll start by saying, in the resumption of diplomacy with the DPRK, we have to recognize the DPRK's energy insecurity, that is their lack of fuels, their lack of access to commercial fuels in particular, is one, but not the only driver of their choice to pursue nuclear weapons and chemical and biological weapons as well. As a consequence, energy sanctions and resolutions passed to date, although they're targeted in the right direction, are unlikely to have the desired effects, because without addressing the energy insecurity for the DPRK, they are unlikely to come to the table and be willing to come to the table and negotiate about nuclear weapons. As such, cooperative threat reduction plus activities addressing the DPRK energy sector, in particular those that seek to involve the DPRK in international energy projects, can play important roles in engagement. And Peter mentioned 3 projects that we, Nautilus, have worked on with the North Koreans. This is our wind power project, 1998 and 2000, and Peter is here enjoying a toast at the end of the project, and here I am climbing up a still being built wind power tower, not wind power, but wind water pumping tower with a combination of North Koreans and our American colleagues. So that was quite an experience, and we learned a lot about working with North Koreans from that project. Following up on that, we had the Building Energy Efficiency Training Project, which resulted in the transfer of some insulation and other materials for a building in Pyongyang, and a study tour in Beijing of various energy efficiency installations, as well as some training in the use of energy efficiency modeling software. And as Peter said, just last December, we went to Mongolia, and there we hosted an international group that included a DPRK delegation to look at solar, agro-solar farm and a wind power installation. So so these are the sorts of things we've been doing with North Koreans and learning from. So this Energy Sector Engagement and Assistance Project, CTR Plus, is designed to be a quick pilot project that is 6 to 12 months, including elements such as building envelope system efficiency, particularly in Pyongyang, small power, that is hydro, wind, solar, microgrids, agricultural equipment efficiency, humanitarian measures, job creation during the project and after, carbon dioxide emissions reduction, greenhouse gas reduction with potential credits for the Republic of Korea, for example, as an option. It doesn't seem likely to violate at least the spirit of the sanctions that are ongoing, and would provide images of cooperation, such as cargo ships headed north, piled high with crates of insulation. And it's a first step to rebuilding the transmission and distribution grid from the bottom up, which we think is probably the way to go, and a pilot program. So some of the key tasks that are going to be involved in this project include negotiating funding and permissions. In this case, we mean mostly permissions from the international community. We're going to need waivers for sanctions. We're going to need waivers for being able to transfer materials and information to the DPRK as part of the project. Then a survey of DPRK energy use and infrastructure in candidate buildings is going to be required in order to know what measures we're going to need, how many, and how we're going to apply them. And modeling of building energy efficiency performance and design measures, and design of energy efficiency measures, training of North Korean counterparts in building energy efficiency surveys, building energy modeling. And again, are we going to need to require US government permissions? That's something that we'll have to find out. Then we'd finalize the selection of energy efficiency measures and sites for mini grids and renewable energy installation. Select and cost those measures and equipment, figure out how to buy them, prepare plans to install the measures, order and ship the products, which could range from insulation, weather stripping, windows and doors, renewable energy equipment, wind and solar, grid intertie equipment, and testing and installation and data logging equipment associated with all of those. And it's possible we could get some of those materials at concessional prices or free if, for example, firms from the ROK were willing to contribute. Then we would install the energy efficiency and renewable energy measures on project sites, do quality control and quality assurance on those installations for the renewable energy and energy efficiency equipment and for the installations in buildings, for example. We'd want to do some monitoring that would tell us how users' use of energy has changed as a result of the installation of insulation or new windows, for example. And we'd communicate those results to stakeholders and to plan next steps. So we'd digest all the participant interviews and put it together as a report so that we could be built on for the next project that in the pipeline. And then there would be a phase of overall project management, which would continue throughout the period of the project. So what types of organizations would we need to do this kind of work? Well, for funding and permissions, we need groups groups experienced with working with DPRK related agencies in the US and the Republic of Korea and possibly in Europe. We'd need to, for surveys of energy use, we'd need, for example, NGOs focusing on energy efficiency or firms associated with doing audits, with expertise in doing audits, for example, for the World Bank and others. For modeling of building energy performance and the design of energy efficiency measures, there's some great work being done in US national labs and elsewhere in the world. And there are non-governmental organizations that do that as well. For training, we may need more academic groups in modeling of building energy performance and in surveys to train DPRK counterparts. For the selection of energy efficiency and renewable energy measures, we would probably call on that would need to be done in consultation with the North Koreans, but would require different skills. So you'd need people experienced in working with North Koreans plus experts from, for example, energy NGOs or national labs to help together to come to that final list of measures. Then we'd prepare plans to install the measures, and that would involve groups working in measure and site selection managed by a firm. Once we get to the point of installing measures, we're going to need a firm that's adept in implementing big projects very rapidly, and that may be a US or European firm or possibly elsewhere. Then that firm would probably order and ship materials and equipment. And to install the measures, we would build teams of North Koreans with a few internationals to oversee and to help and to provide training, for example, in use of tools. So it might be groups of North Koreans working under international foremen, and they might specialize in particular areas. So for the apartment weatherization projects, you might have insulation teams and wallboard teams and paint teams and windows teams, and again under the ultimate direction of some lead firm. Then you would have a separate firm doing quality control and quality assurance and monitoring and training of users. Then there would be a group experience communicating with policymakers on DPRK issues to synthesize and communicate the results of the project and to plan the next steps. And you'd have overall project management coordinated by the lead firm that I mentioned before. So an illustrative budget might be $100 million for a project that can be completed in about 12 months. But that can be scaled up or down as needed, but better come to agreement with whoever's going to fund it before this gets offered to the North Koreans, because they will hold us to it if there's an offer that's floated. So some of the costs that will be involved are building energy efficiency and renewable energy hardware and installation and labor costs. That will be the bulk of the overall 100 million in our illustrative budget. And other costs will be administration costs, shipping costs, and costs for project and program preparation. So it's important to design these sorts of projects so they can be built on with future engagement activities in mind, and also as models for peaceful redevelopment activities by the DPRK itself. Because as Peter mentioned, the North Koreans are going to be looking to the international groups that come in for these engagement activities for ideas as to what can be disseminated broadly throughout the country. And they do that very well. When they find something that's doable, when they find something that's useful, they can disseminate it very, very well. So we'll need to focus on that sort of an option. Should take advantage of growing technical and organizational capacity in terms of the DPRK partners, should meet the needs of several different DPRK constituencies, because there are, as we found in our projects, always different constituencies, and you have to kind of have something for each of them that they can then report on up the chain as having ticked their boxes for what they need. And also you need to support participants and supporters in the Republic of Korea and elsewhere, especially in the Northeast Asia region. So the project should be constructed as to contribute towards peaceful, sustainable improvements in the DPRK economy. Now I'd like to shift to another topic that Peter mentioned, which is the DPRK as a participant in regional energy infrastructure. Because of its placement on the Northeast Asian in the Northeast Asian region, there are opportunities for the DPRK to participate in, for example, regional oil pipelines, regional natural gas pipelines, and energy grid interconnections. And these sorts of interconnections, these sorts of resource sharing efforts have been discussed now for many, many years. And but sort of coming back around to as a result of climate change, and as a result of the focus on needing to make electricity grids in particular more climate friendly, there have been additional schemes produced, and one of our commentators will talk about that. Such as the Asian Supergrid or GobiTech. Those are ideas for connecting the countries of Northeast Asia in a way that reduce greenhouse gas emissions overall for the electricity systems of the region. So co-development and development of renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies is another potential regional infrastructure area. Sharing of excess oil refining capacity, cooperation on transportation infrastructure, LNG, liquefied natural gas import capabilities, and co-development between the DPRK and the Republic of Korea, for example, in the short term anyway, or medium term, and then cooperation on regional emergency fuel storage. And this is actually a graphic that came from one of our projects in about 2001, 2002, and shows a potential energy interconnection between Russia and the Republic of Korea going through the DPRK, with some power going to the DPRK, but noting that because of the weakness of the DPRK grid, even if those reactors that were being built back then, the reactors from the Korean Peninsula Energy Development Organization, or KEDO, those would have to be plugged into a power line going essentially between Russia and the Republic of Korea, because the DPRK grid would have been too weak and remains too weak to accommodate those reactors. Some of the potential benefits of the DPRK's involvement in regional energy infrastructure include gaining access to energy resources that would be difficult to develop on its own, obtaining rents or monetary payments for energy supplies passing through the DPRK, better access to conventional energy and energy efficiency and renewable energy technologies, and from the perspective of the international community, the DPRK would be obliged to work with the countries of the region to negotiate access rights and fees, tariffs, and other parameters of cooperative projects, meaning that markets and legal structures would need to be developed within the DPRK to accommodate that. And they would need to undertake and make public assessments of its energy resources and infrastructure in order to cooperate in these international projects. Additional benefits include the DPRK will learn and continue to learn techniques that are common throughout the international community: economic cost benefit analysis, other economic and financial concepts, substantial opportunities for capacity building for DPRK officials and technicians. They'll allow foreigners better access to the DPRK, allowing them to learn more about the needs and situation there in order to design these projects, cooperative projects, to be more useful in the future. And the DPRK residents will have expanded contact with people and ideas from other nations. And we found that to be really a rewarding part of the projects we've done in the DPRK, is just talking with them, having them become actually much more relaxed around us, because when they started, they're very tense around an American group. But after a while, at the end of one project, one of the North Koreans who was the most tense, I would say, when we met him, was playing Frisbee with us in the lobby of the Koryo Hotel. So it's perfectly possible for North Koreans to learn to like us even. This is a very different approach and likely outcomes than the negotiations associated with, for example, previous types of denuclearization negotiations, agreed framework, six-party talks, which focused on the value that would be received by the DPRK for the concessions that they made. So to identify and match DPRK energy needs with the consortium assistance criteria for this energy-focused third-party CTR engagement activities, they have to consider DPRK energy needs and wants, which are not necessarily the same thing. But at the same time, they have to be acceptable to the international community, and they need to seek to integrate DPRK into regional initiatives around, for example, sharing of energy resources, energy efficiency improvement. They need to introduce and reinforce market-based approaches, because that's the way that the DPRK is going to eventually get integrated with the international economy. And they need to stress the need for transparency in transactions and in regional and in building the regional organizations that are needed to support these initiatives. Shata, how are we doing for time? I confess that I've lost track.
I think you can go on for a couple of more minutes, David, and then we should be wrapping up fairly soon, if that's okay.
Okay. So what I would like to do, and many of you may have seen our work on this in the past, is just to give you a thumbnail sketch of the DPRK energy sector before closing. DPRK energy per capita energy use was about 3 times of China's and 50% of Japan's as of 1990, but after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, decline in the supply of imported crude oil started to fall, although it's been stable thanks to imports from China since 2000. There's been degradation of the electricity generation, transport, and transmission grid, and degradation of industrial facilities. So what they used to produce, they no longer produce. It's certainly not in the quantities they used to. As a result, there have been about a 60% reduction in energy use per capita, with biomass replacing commercial energy, electricity, oil, and coal in many end uses, particularly for the residential sector. Coal does remain a dominant form of energy use. And the DPRK grid, although it nominally has a capacity of about 8 to 10 gigawatts, is probably only got 2 to 3 gigawatts of usable capacity. And its annual 2020 electricity use was similar to that of Washington, D.C., by our estimate. DPRK military uses a substantial fraction of oil products and electricity in the DPRK, but the making a distinction between military use and civilian use in the DPRK is not so easy. Investment will be required, as Peter mentioned, on a massive scale to refurbish, replace, or repair energy system elements, including for the electricity grid. And without international assistance, there's at best going to be slow and marginal improvements. This is the structure we use to estimate, to hang our estimates of North Korean supply and demand of energy. This is called an energy balance table. And we have a number of publications that can show you that in much greater detail. Just to show you the evolution of our of at least what we estimate to be energy demand by fuel. You see wood and biomass actually forming a much greater portion of a smaller pie as we go from 1990 to more recent years, and then a decline in 2020 thanks to COVID. As Peter mentioned, you have energy demand by sector, which is marked by using energy sparingly, I would say. This is a truck powered by a gasifier, so that it will take coal or biomass fuel. Transport involves multiple types of people, civilians, soldiers, and tradespeople, all using the same facilities. And then Peter mentioned the sprouting of solar photovoltaic panels here in apartment buildings in Pyongyang and elsewhere, as people just do what they can to get their own source of power in the face of a electricity grid that doesn't serve them very well. Here again is energy use by sector. Residential sector is a larger portion of the pie than it was in 1990, but that's because of a shift to less efficiently used wood and other biomass. And you can see that imports are virtually all of the supply of crude oil and refined products for the DPRK. There's some exports of coal, and these are much smaller now than they were in the mid 2010s. But the rest is fueled by domestic production of wood and coal are the main fuels. So the third-party assessment project, key project elements, energy needs assessment, building energy efficiency measures, and mini-grid renewable energy measures, as I mentioned before. Capacity building, follow-up, including surveys of apartment dwellers and data collection and logging from installations, and linkages to future economic development, opportunities for in-country production of selected materials such as magnesium oxide wallboard, for example, might be a good opportunity for the DPRK. So in conclusion, sustainable solutions to DPRK's long-term energy problems are a necessary but not sufficient condition for enduring success in the nuclear weapons negotiation. And if you fail to address those energy needs for energy services, the nuclear energy issue will not be solvable in a sustainable way. Sanctions make life more difficult for ordinary North Koreans, leaving many more energy services unmet. but don't have much impact on, in our view, on missile or nuclear weapons programs. There are various energy cooperation options. Domestic DPRK and regional energy and other networks engagement options that involve efficiency and renewable energy are generally robust for applications in the DPRK. Should start with smaller and local projects with extensive capacity building opportunities and then build on those. Consider regional energy import and export needs as you try and work the DPRK into regional grids. And this is again getting to what one of the last points on one of Peter's slides. Those reactors, those CATO reactors, are unlikely to be built, but they do serve as a precedent the DPRK will remember in negotiations. So the nuclear energy issue cannot go away completely, even if it's not probably the most practical thing for the DPRK to use in meeting its energy needs. So solving the linked nuclear weapons and energy insecurity issues requires a phased, coordinated, and stepwise and multifaceted approach on local, national, and regional levels. So we're suggesting a 6 to 12 month collaborative pilot project to start with third-party financing, third-party organization, focusing on renewables, energy efficiency, humanitarian agents, energy aid, and economic development, and build toward integrating the DPRK with Northeast Asian nations in cooperative energy projects that support the goals of cooperative threat reduction with economic integration, market development, and transparency in economic and technical negotiations, regional institution building, and collaboration on technical and environmental standards, and other cooperative opportunities. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you for your very detailed and thoughtful presentation. There's a lot for us to discuss and unpack. But before we move on, I would like to announce that the public session will end here. Thank you to those of you who have been joining us via the YouTube live stream. We look forward to welcoming you to our third and final webinar of this series next week, the full details of which can be found on our website, apln.network. Thank you. And now, before we move on to the commentators panel and open floor discussion, we will have a 5-minute break. So I will see you all again in 5 minutes.